I want you to tell me something. What do Pokemon Blue, Call of Duty 4 and the original RuneScape all have in common? They're all considered to be some of the greatest games ever, and they're all from the late 90s to the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, if you Google best games of all time, the majority of them are actually from this time period. Does that mean that there are no great games being made anymore? No, not at all. GTA 5, The Witcher 3 or The Last of Us are some stellar modern classics. Plus, let's be real, these lists are all some journalist's opinion anyway. At the end of the day, everyone enjoys a different type of game. However, a lot of gamers are always talking about how games were better back in the day, more fun, more enjoyable, yada yada yada. Let's be real, that's probably nostalgia speaking, but that got me thinking, is there actually some truth to that? Have games actually become worse over time? I mean, recent AAA releases aren't a great example of games becoming better. They're usually not even finished, and they even never get finished. It's a shell of what we used to get, or is it? My name's Chivalric, and in this video, we're going to explore that particular question. Have games actually become worse? Enough rambling, let's talk about it. I think it's important that we establish what a good game is to begin with, before we talking about something becoming worse, when we don't even know what something good looks like. I think it's a combination of 4 factors: gameplay, graphics, story, and feel. And especially that last one is a bit more abstract, because I feel like a game can have incredible gameplay mechanics, good looking graphics, the best story ever, but it can just miss that feel. You can also call it enjoyment or whatever term you might put on it. I think every gamer that watches this knows what I'm talking about, and I will not really go hard on that one. But gameplay, graphics, and story to a certain extent are all very important factors of what makes a game good. If the game looks like an absolute potato, especially in modern times, and it's not just an art style, but it's just them slacking on graphics, that can really take you out of the immersion that they're trying to build. It can be the best game ever, but that can literally just break or make a game. And the same goes with gameplay. If the game looks incredible, it has a great story, but it's literally you just clicking on the screen for like an hour before you can even do something, and that's not really that fun to play. It needs to have all these elements packed into one for people to be able to enjoy a video game. And I said that story to a certain extent is important as well, and the reason why that is games like Call of Duty or CSGO or any multiplayer game for that matter, they don't really need a story. It is nice when they have it, but I think majority of the players don't really care if there's a story in those games, as long as the gameplay is fun, the graphics are alright, and the game just feels good and fun to play. And it's satisfying to either take on enemies or whatever you might do in a video game. But objectively, I think you can actually say that games have become better over time. If you compare Pokemon Blue to the new Pokemon Violet, I think you can't really argue that Pokemon Violet is a worse game by the standards set that I just said, like the gameplay, graphics, story, and feel. However, people will still consider Pokemon Blue as one of the better Pokemon games, or the first generation for that matter, whether it's one of the remakes that they released, that doesn't really matter. But people see them as incredible games, and don't get me wrong, they are. However, factually, those games were really broken as well, and the story was pretty decent, yet again the graphics were horrible, and the gameplay was, well, pretty much the same in Pokemon. Let's be honest, it hasn't really changed, and that is a strength in there as well. And I think the new ones have just improved on everything that they built back in the past. And I think a reason as well that people just complain is the current culture that we have. Look at the title of this video. I will have to title it Games Have Become Worse Over Time, or Have Games Become Worse Over Time, because that's what people want to click on. People click on negativity. Look at any headline that you will see either on social medias or in the newspaper or on news websites, wherever you consume your media, they're always negative. And that is because our brains tend to want to know what is up with it, either because we're angry about it or we actually feel the exact same because it corresponds with the opinion that we actually have. And everyone also has an outlet to complain nowadays. Everyone has a social media account. And let's be real, if you look at older games, I mean, Mario 64, for example, incredible game, but it's a broken mess. If you've ever seen any of the speedruns, it's broken beyond belief, but people love it nonetheless. And I do think that if social media was around, we might have a different consensus about a game like that. Let's be honest, in recent years, there are just a little bit too many examples of games that have been released with big budgets by AAA companies like Ubisoft or Activision that have failed to deliver. not in expectation, but in quality. I think the first title that comes to mind, at least for me personally, that failed to deliver on release, that was a AAA trusted franchise, was Assassin's Creed Unity back in 2014. And it's weird to say now that you were able to trust a company like Ubisoft, but back then they released Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, Black Flag, Assassin's Creed 3, all in succession. They were all incredible games, and the follow-up was going to be the next-gen version, Assassin's Creed Unity, modeled after the French Revolution. And it released in a broken state, which I can forgive, right? That might sound strange, especially talking about this subject, but if an ambitious project that where you want to make something for a new type of console, where you want to model it one-to-one after France. I mean, recently when the Notre Dame was burned down because there was some fire there, they used Assassin's Creed Unity to rebuild it because they had a one-to-one model of the Notre Dame. So I get it that with ambition comes issues and comes bugs, and as I said, I can forgive that, especially with everything surrounding it on a new console and whatever they wanted to do with it. But it wasn't just that. There were many, many more issues that it. If you depict someone's history, you might want to do it in a respectful way. It got so bad that the French press was involved into it because the depiction was so bad and disrespectful that it literally was in the news. Like, imagine you just sitting behind the television, you just see like Assassin's Creed Unity just absolutely violated France in a video game. You would just, that's crazy. Like, you did so poorly that you're offending a country, bro. And I mean, French people are offended quickly, but let's be real. But that wasn't it. It was also, they had MTX from the start. If you wanted to unlock everything in the game, you had to pay an extra like $100 on top of whatever you already paid for the game, like $70 or $60, whatever it might be, to fully unlock the video game. And I think that is never a good sign. And then if you hear that they just didn't have time, or that they don't think it's worth to develop female characters, which, by the way, is a direct quote from the developer or lead developer or whoever was in charge of the PR back then of Assassin's Creed Unity. Yeah, like, sure, we want to do a female character, but it might not be worth our time. Like, those things just, no, that's not good. Like, that's not how you want to launch a game. Even if you think that, which I think is crazy, but even if you think that, just don't say it out loud, please. Don't be like that. But another modern release that is more so ingrained in our brains is Cyberpunk 2077, released back in 2020, which was hyped or at least teased 8 years in advance, which, let's be real, you're already going wrong there, at least in my opinion. When you're trying to hype up a game 8 years before it's released, then you're just digging your own grave. But it had a 4-year active development cycle, so they worked on it for 4 years actively, and it was after The Witcher 3, which, let's be honest, is probably one of the best games ever to be made, but definitely one of the best games, if not the best game in the genre that it was released in. But then following it up with another game is always difficult. It might not be as good, but Cyberpunk didn't even come close. If you're reading things like there's a lot of crunch, long weeks, and even longer work days, night shifts, and whatever else, and eventually it being delayed because of it, that's not a good sign. Let's be honest, we can be hopeful. A delay might mean that they realize that the game is broken and that you can maybe release it in a less broken state if you delay it, but the launch was so bad it had to actually be pulled off the PlayStation Store. They had to take it off the PlayStation Store because the launch was so bad, and PlayStation were getting so many complaints that they literally told CD Projekt Red, we're not selling your game anymore. Figure out how you're going to sell your game, but we're not doing it anymore. And that is literally an extreme, in my opinion, for a company like Sony to do, is to pull a game off their store because it's so bad. And I can make an entire list or an hour-long video of games that released in this state in whatever shape or form, and it might actually be a very interesting series that I can do if you guys are interested in it. Games that release very controversially and where they end up leading, because there are examples like No Man's Sky, for example, that had a terrible release. They're actually really good games now, or even Rainbow Six Siege for that matter. But what is the reason for these failures? What makes it that a 300 million or 500 million game can fail? Isn't that guaranteed success if you just put enough money in it? No. But the reason is actually quite clear, at least for many gamers. The majority of us can pretty much easily pinpoint the reason for the failure very easily, especially people who have been playing video games over the last decade. Big companies usually ruin video games because people are in charge that only care about money. People who probably never even held a controller before. It's not the developers, and that's why it always makes me angry when people go after developers. Don't get me wrong, there's some rotten apples there as well, but 99% of developers care about making a project that they can be proud of, that they can release and be like, hey, this is actually functioning. Sure, it has some bugs, but overall, it's like 98% finished instead of the 70% at best what we get sometimes now. Those extra hours and those deadlines should mean something and not just something that they just get a lot of hate for, and then because it doesn't perform well, the company just moves on to the next project because, well, it didn't perform well, we didn't get enough money, so sure you can fix it, but we don't care, so I don't know how you're gonna be going on about it, but hey ho, we're gonna move on to the next cow that we can milk because we need to make money. And those demands that they get from the higher ups actually make no sense. I once had a conversation with someone who worked on a AAA project. They were a designer and they told me that they just get emailed a list of cosmetics they have to design that made no sense with the theme of the game. And when they asked, because at the time they were new, the answer that they got was because it will make us a lot of money. And the fact that that's the answer to the reason why they're making something just goes to show what's wrong in video games right now. But I think there's an even bigger reason for the outrage that always happens when a game like this releases, and it has to do with those who are passionate about gaming and whose hobby it is, because they feel like their valuable free time is being wasted by greedy suits that only care about squeezing every last dollar out of a video game before moving on to the next one. All they see is a release window where they can push the game, cosmetics or microtransactions and even IRL merchandise to make a boatload of money, forgetting the most important thing about video games. The fact that the users who buy their products aren't just buying it with their money. We are buying it with our own spare time. A lot of us go to school or have a job and don't have all the time in the world to play video games, and being on our consoles or computers is our time to de-stress from a long day, and the last thing you want to do is dealing with a game that doesn't function or you can't realistically progress in unless you spend hundreds of dollars on microtransactions. Does that mean all video games have become worse? Thankfully, no. There's still many examples out there of great projects that are functioning. However, the majority of the AAA titles that have been released over the last few years, and you could even say the last decade, have all been pretty much disappointments because they get hyped up too much, then they get rushed, then they get released, and then they either get fixed, quote unquote, with no updates that really fix the problems or that, try to fool you, or MTX fixes because, yeah, you know what, we'll just sell you a better version of our own game within our game because that's how we can even make more money and maybe get some of the money that we lost on this project back from our users. And that needs to stop. And I'm really happy that indie games are around that, are actually made by people who are passionate and are released when they are supposed to be released, right? And sure, they also have issues. Every single game has issues. But there's a difference between having an issue in a game where there's some bugs here and there and the game literally not functioning and then it being fixed with either empty excuses, microtransactions, or whatever they might come up with to just squeeze even more money out of their users. I hope you guys did enjoy this analysis of video games and if they have become worse. If you do enjoy the content, subscribe and check out one of the videos that are currently on screen. They're probably very enjoyable to watch, so click them. Do it.